Okay, let's unpack this. When you hear the name Rockefeller, well, what comes to mind?
Staggering wealth, usually. Oil, maybe?
Exactly. For most of us, it's just synonymous with huge money, oil, maybe those famous buildings in New York. But the actual scale of their influence, it's almost hard to wrap your head around.
Hmm.
It covers not just building that massive fortune, but really actively shaping whole industries, cities, American culture, even, education and medicine.
It's true. There are stories just woven so deeply into American history. You see it from the pretty cutthroat business world of the Gilded Age right through to creating institutions we still live with today.
Right. And that's really our mission for this deep dive. We've pulled together a whole stack of sources, articles, research notes to really get into the Rockefeller dynasty.
Yeah, we want to trace that story from, the very beginning, the
Yeah.
explosion of Standard Oil,
Uh-huh.
through the big challenges they ran into, and then into this, well, frankly, incredible and sometimes surprising legacy they built. Philanthropy, politics, art, all of it. Our goal is to pull out the really key nuggets here, connect those dots for you. Like, what was Standard Oil really beyond the name?
And who are the key people? Not just John D. Sr., but the generations after him.
And what does their, let's face it, very complex story tell you today about wealth, ambition, power, responsibility?
Okay, let's jump right in then. You really can't talk about the Rockefellers without starting at the beginning. John D. Rockefeller Sr. and the empire he built, Standard Oil.
Right. You have to picture the scene. Mid-1800s, oil's just been discovered in Pennsylvania. It's chaotic.
Kind of a Wild West situation.
Very much so.
Right.
Edwin Drake hits oil in 1859, and it's a scramble. But Rockefeller, he came from pretty modest beginnings. He saw the real opportunity maybe wasn't in drilling. That was too unpredictable.
Ah,
It
okay.
was in refining, distribution, the more stable, controllable end of things. He was known for being meticulous, almost obsessive about efficiency and, well, control.
So his first moves are in Cleveland, Ohio. The sources say he joined an oil refining business there, 1863?
Yes, with partners, Clark and Andrews. But he moved fast to take charge. By 1865, he buys out Clark. Apparently that was quite aggressive. People called it the Oil War in Cleveland.
Wow.
Then, a really key move in 1867, he brings in Henry Flagler. Flagler knew transportation, railroads especially. That was crucial.
Okay.
By 1870, their company already had the biggest refineries in Cleveland.
And that's the year they incorporate the Standard Oil Company of Ohio. And this is where it just
God,
takes off.
takes off, putting it mildly. The growth was stunning and famously aggressive.
How aggressive? What kind of numbers are we talking?
Well, think about this. By 1880, just 10 years later, Standard Oil controlled. Well, the sources estimate somewhere between 90 and 95% of all oil refining in the entire United States.
90 to 95%. That's almost unbelievable today.
Yeah.
How did they pull that off so fast? What were the tactics?
It was a multi-pronged approach based on what we've read.
Yeah.
Systematically eliminated competitors, sometimes bought them out fairly, other
Also
times,
applied some pressure.
let's just say heavy pressure, yeah. They absorbed rivals through mergers. They bought up vital infrastructure like pipelines, basically cutting off competitors' transport.
Control the pipes, control the flow.
Exactly. And the big one, they used their huge volume to demand and get secret preferential rebates from the railroads. Cheaper shipping than anyone else.
So controlling everything, getting the crude, refining it, shipping it out.
Pretty much end-to-end control. They built what was effectively a near-total monopoly.
And all that power, all that control, it leads to the next big thing, the Standard Oil Trust.
Right. That was formalized in 1882. It basically bundled Standard Oil and all its affiliated companies, production, refining, marketing, under one single board of trustees.
Oh.
Rockefeller himself was on it, of course.
And this trust structure, it wasn't just about centralizing control, was it? There was like another layer.
Oh, definitely. One really interesting point from the sources is how deliberately complicated it was. Layers of companies, agreements. It governed about 40 corporations, maybe a third totally owned.
Making it hard to figure out.
Exactly. The journalist Ida Tarbell, who wrote that famous expose, she said it created a maze of legal structures that made it basically impossible for the public, or even investigators, to understand how it worked.
Right, I remember that quote. You could see the effects, she said, but you couldn't easily prove how it was all put together legally.
Precisely. Super opaque by design. And while, they argued this consolidation brought efficiency, economies of scale, lower costs,
The sheer concentration of power became a huge issue.
A massive public and political issue.
Yeah.
Criticism just kept growing, especially fueled by journalists like Tarbell.
Which, inevitably leads to the courts.
Yeah, the legal battle started fairly early. 1892, the Ohio Supreme Court actually ordered the trust to dissolve.
But did they?
Well, not really. Standard Oil being Standard Oil, they kind of found ways around it, kept operating essentially, but shifted the center of gravity to New York City.
Masters of adaptation. Or maybe evasion.
Yeah, certainly persistent. They formally reincorporated in 1899. New name, Standard Oil Company, New Jersey. Set up as a holding company.
So it just transferred everything over.
Pretty much. Transferred all the assets from the old trust structure to this new corporate setup.
But the heat was on by then. The federal government had to be noticing.
Oh, absolutely. And Congress had already acted, partly because of Standard Oil's practices, by passing the Sherman Antitrust Act back in 1890, making monopolies illegal.
Right, the tool they needed.
Exactly. So in 1906, the U.S. government files this major lawsuit against Standard Oil Company, New Jersey, using that very act.
And that leads to the big one, the Supreme Court decision in 1911.
That's the landmark case. The court ordered Standard Oil of New Jersey to divest, break it up, sell off its major holdings.
How many?
A massive 33 separate companies had to be spun off. It was the dismantling of, well, probably the most powerful business the world had ever seen up to that point.
And these weren't just small pieces. These became giants in their own right.
Oh, yeah. These broken up parts became the bedrock of the 20th century oil industry. And beyond, you had Standard Oil of New York that became Mobil.
Okay.
Standard Oil Indiana became Amoco. Standard Oil of California. Chevron.
And the parent company, Standard Oil of New Jersey.
That became Exxon. And Standard Oil of Ohio, or Sohio, was eventually bought by BP.
And then decades later, you see some of them merging back together, like Exxon and Mobil, Chevron and Texaco.
Right, bringing some pieces of the old empire back together in a way. And the sources mention lots of others spun off too. Atlantic Richfield, Pennzoil. The list is long. It just shows how incredibly pervasive Standard Oil really was.
Truly a sprawling network, legally forced apart, but leaving these incredibly powerful descendants.
Exactly.
So, okay, you've got John D. Rockefeller Sr. He builds this colossal fortune using these pretty aggressive methods, becomes the world's first billionaire around 1916. But then something changes. By the 1890s, he's mostly retired from running the business day to day.
Yes, and this is where the story takes that really fascinating pivot. The same focus, the same organizational genius that built the empire.
Gets turned towards giving it away.
Precisely. He becomes one of history's absolute biggest philanthropists. It's this really striking contrast, isn't it, between how the money was made and the sheer scale of how it was given away.
And this wasn't just, like, random donations. He, along with his key advisors, his son, John G. Jr., was heavily involved, and a wealth manager, too. They were creating major institutions built to last.
Think about the impact. He helped establish the University of Chicago in 1890, taking a small Baptist college and turning it into a major research university. Kind of the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research in 1901. Now it's Rockefeller University, a huge name in biomedical science.
Right.
The General Education Board in 1902, that focused on improving education all across the U.S., especially in the South.
Yeah.
And then the really big one, perhaps, the Rockefeller Foundation in 1913, its impact on public health, agriculture, science. It's truly global.
That's just an incredible foundation for so much modern science, education, global health work. And a lot of that momentum was carried forward, even expanded by the next generation, wasn't it? Particularly his son, John D. Rockefeller Jr.
Absolutely. John D. Jr., born 1874. He went to Brown, joined the family business at first. But his focus, his personality maybe, was different. He got deeply involved in the philanthropy side.
And there was a specific, really tragic event that historians point to, right? Something that really solidified his turn towards philanthropy.
Yes, you're probably thinking of the Ludlow Massacre in 1914.
Tell us about that.
Well, it involved the company the Rockefellers owned, the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company. There was a bitter coal miners' strike. And sources describe this awful day, April 20th, when violence broke out between the striking miners and private security guards plus the National Guard.
Okay.
A tent colony where the miners and their families were living was attacked and set on fire. Around 60 people were killed. Horrifically, that included women and children.
Just terrible. And directly linked to a Rockefeller company.
Exactly. And the sources suggest this deeply affected John D. Jr. It seems to have spurred him to become much more public, much more dedicated to philanthropy. Many see it as a conscious effort to sort of repair the family name, the family's public image after Ludlow.
And his own impact, especially if you look at New York City, it's just massive.
Undeniable. He was the main force behind building Rockefeller Center, that huge complex, finished around 1940. And here's a detail from the sources worth remembering. That massive project created about 75,000 jobs right in the middle of the Great Depression.
Wow, that's significant.
Huge counter-cyclical investment. He also helped set up the USO in '41. He donated the land for the UN headquarters in Manhattan.
Right, that prime real estate.
Exactly. He funded the massive restoration of colonial Williamsburg in Virginia, supported affordable housing initiatives in New York, and he funded the Metropolitan Museum's purchase of the Cloisters, that amazing medieval collection uptown. His fingerprint is all over the city's landscape and its cultural institutions.
And we can't talk about him without mentioning his wife, Abby Aldrich Rockefeller.
Absolutely not. She was the daughter of a powerful U.S. Senator, Nelson Aldrich, a major figure herself with her own distinct philanthropic interests.
What were her main focuses?
She supported groups like the YWCA, Planned Parenthood, but her single greatest achievement, according to the sources, was really co-founding the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA.
MoMA. Wow. When was that?
1929, with two friends. And you had to think how radical that was then. There weren't really major museums in the U.S. focused just on modernism.
A real pioneer.
Totally. And MoMA became, world famous. Later on, the family actually donated the properties for MoMA's iconic sculpture garden, and it was dedicated specifically in her memory.
So you see this evolution. John D. Sr. builds the business empire and lays the groundwork for big philanthropy. Then John D. Jr. and Abby really steer that energy, especially into urban development, conservation, and critically, the arts.
A definite shift in focus, building on the foundation.
Which then brings us to the third generation, the 6 children of John D. Jr. and Abby. There was Abby, then John D. III, Nelson, Lawrence, Winthrop, and David.
And that generation, wow, they took the family name and legacy in so many different directions. Huge impacts in politics, banking, conservation, the arts, just incredibly diverse paths.
The eldest daughter, Abby Rockefeller Maze, she was involved in philanthropy too, right? Focused on green spaces.
Yes, notably creating Greenacre Park in New York City, a small but really beautiful urban oasis. A lovely contribution.
And then the 5 brothers, each carved out such a distinct niche. John D. Rockefeller III, the eldest brother, his focus was largely on Asia.
Very much so, especially post-World War II. He was instrumental in founding the Asia Society, helped revitalize the Japan Society, huge influence on U.S.-Asia relations and cultural exchange. And he was also a driving force behind creating Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts in New York.
Okay, the Nelson. Probably the most famous politically.
Yeah, Nelson Rockefeller, a leading figure in the sort of liberal wing of the Republican Party. 4 terms as governor of New York. He ran for president several times, didn't quite get there.
But he did become vice president.
Yes, under Gerald Ford, the 41st VP. And he was also a huge art patron. He founded the Museum of Primitive Art. Later, its collection was absorbed into the Metropolitan Museum, forming the Michael C. Rockefeller Wing, named in memory of his son, who tragically died on an expedition.
Then Lawrence Rockefeller. His path was different again, venture capital and the environment.
Yeah, quite a combination. He was really forward-looking in business, an early investor in tech giants like Apple and Intel.
No kidding, early Apple investor.
Yep, but he was also deeply passionate about conservation. He played a major role in developing and expanding numerous national parks and protected areas across the country. A real environmentalist legacy there.
Okay, then Winthrop Rockefeller. He headed south.
He did. Settled down in Arkansas, started a major cattle ranch, Winrock Farms, and he got involved in politics there, becoming a pretty transformational figure as the Republican governor of Arkansas from 67 to 71, broke a long Democratic hold on power.
And finally, David Rockefeller, the youngest brother and a giant in banking.
Absolutely. David became chairman and CEO of Chase Manhattan Bank, guiding it through major mergers to become a global financial powerhouse. Like his father, he was also deeply involved in New York City development. He spearheaded the building of One Chase Manhattan Plaza downtown and was a key figure behind the push to build the original World Trade Center towers.
Which, of course, reshaped the skyline dramatically before their tragic destruction in 2001.
A huge and ultimately poignant mark on the city. David was the last surviving sibling of that generation. He lived to be 101, passing away just in 2017.
And you see descendants pop up in creative fields too, carrying on that arts patronage, perhaps in different ways.
It's a family narrative that's just fundamentally intertwined with how modern America developed. You've got the the aggressive industrial consolidation that built the initial fortune,
Followed by the huge antitrust battles that literally reshaped American corporate law.
and then this pivot into just an unprecedented scale of philanthropy, funding breakthroughs in medicine, transforming education, conserving natural spaces, supporting arts and culture all over the world.
So we've really covered a lot of ground today, tracing this dynasty from, a single refinery in Cleveland
To a global empire that got broken up by the courts.
and then transformed into a different kind of empire, one built through massive generosity and civic engagement.
Their impact is just undeniable. They left behind not just, wealth and iconic buildings, but institutions, ideas, policies, and a really complex, sometimes contradictory legacy that still resonates today.
Absolutely. And maybe here's something for you, the listener, to think about after this deep dive. Consider that core tension we kept coming back to.
Hmm.
The aggressive, often ruthless methods used to build that initial Standard Oil fortune versus the absolutely unparalleled scale of the philanthropy that came later and defined so much of the family's public face for generations.
How do those two sides of the Rockefellers story sit with each other?
Exactly. How do they challenge or maybe inform your own thinking about wealth, about corporate power, and maybe about the responsibilities or lack thereof that come with immense success? Something to definitely mull over.